Okay, let's unpack this. Have you ever watched a movie and felt like there was a whole hidden conversation happening, beneath the surface, communicated not just by the dialogue, but by the very fabric of the film itself, the sets, the costumes, even like a simple prop? Today, we're going on a deep dive into exactly that, how films speak to us through this fascinating blend of visual cues, cultural context, and sometimes, even subtle political commentary.
It's fascinating how universal this concept is, isn't it? Yet, its application can be incredibly varied across different cinematic traditions and cultures. We're going to explore the core principles that allow filmmakers to weave these intricate layers of meaning, and crucially, how our own individual backgrounds and experiences shape what we perceive on screen.
Right. Our mission today is to kind of crack the code of cinematic language. We've gathered some truly insightful sources to guide us, including a paper analyzing the role of semiotics in films from an architect's perspective, which sounds interesting. Also, a Reddit discussion titled Asian Horror Films with Political Subtext. Oh, a journal article on the coalition between politics and entertainment in Hindi films, and perspectives on orality in African cinema. We're going to pull out the most important nuggets from these, helping you understand that films are not just stories, but these complex systems of signs and symbols, speaking to us in ways we might not even consciously realize. I get about it. Understanding the hidden language of film, semiotics. So to truly get a handle on how films communicate on this deeper level, we need to start with the fundamental building block, something called semiotics. That might sound a bit academic, maybe a little dry, but it's incredibly practical once you understand it. It's all about how things take on meaning.
That's a great way to put it. Semiotics is essentially the interdisciplinary science of signs and symbols. Doesn't matter if they're visual, linguistic, or even auditory. It's about how almost anything, an object, an element, a color, a sound, can serve as a sign if it denotes something other than itself. Umberto Eco, a giant in the field, famously said that semiotics is concerned with everything that can be taken as a sign. So this isn't just about the words spoken in a scene, it's about the deliberate choices filmmakers make to craft this complex tapestry of visual information, sound, movement, where each element potentially acts as a sign transmitting a particular meaning.
Okay, so it's like a language made of everything else but the words sometimes.
In a way, yes. Or rather, the words are just one type of sign within a much bigger system. Our source, focusing on Peirce's model, breaks signs down into 3 useful categories based on how they relate to what they represent.
Peirce, right. Charles Sanders Peirce. How did he break it down?
Well, he was really interested in how humans interpret signs and social interactions. So his 3 categories are iconic, indexical, and symbolic.
Okay, iconic, indexical, symbolic. Let's break those down. Laconic first.
Sure. Iconic signs are the most straightforward, maybe. They resemble what they represent. They look like the thing they stand for. Think of a map, it bears a graphical resemblance to the territory it depicts. Or, in film, an iconic sign could be as simple as a close-up of a character's face clearly showing fear. The visual directly represents that emotion. You see fear, you recognize fear. It's a direct image.
Got it. Like a picture of a cat is an iconic sign for a cat.
Exactly. Simple resemblance.
Mm-hmm.
Then there are indexical signs. These have a direct causal relationship to what they represent. There's a connection, like cause and effect. Our source gives the example of a zoomed-in image of the sun in a movie to represent heat. We understand this meaning because, well, sunny days tend to be hot. There's a direct link. Other indexical signs could be smoke indicating fire, or a limp indicating an injury one thing directly points to or is caused by another.
Okay, so smoke means fire because fire causes smoke. That makes sense. It's a direct pointer.
Precisely. And finally, we have symbolic signs. These are the most abstract, maybe the most interesting, because they are arbitrarily related to what they stand for. Their meaning is typically culturally learned or conventionally assigned. There's no inherent resemblance or causal link. Words are the most common example. The word tree, T-R-E-E, doesn't inherently look like a tree, unless maybe it's, fancy calligraphy or something. In film, a specific color might be used to symbolize an emotion like red, often symbolizing danger or passion. There's no direct resemblance between the color red and passion itself, but we've learned to associate it culturally.
So this applies not just to dialogue or obvious visual symbols like a red light meaning stop, but to everything we see and hear. It's almost like a secret language woven into the film.
Exactly. And this concept of signs, it isn't some brand new academic theory, is it? Our sources trace it back pretty far.
That's right. It's not new at all. Theories of signs have been present since the very beginning of philosophy, really. John Locke's essay concerning human understanding, back in 1690, is one of the earliest explicit mentions. But modern semiotics, the way we kind of study it now, truly took shape with 2 opposing, yet complementary theories. These came from the American philosopher Charles Sanders Peirce, who we just mentioned, and the Swiss linguist Ferdinand de Saussure. This was all happening in the late 19th and early 20th centuries.
Right. And while our sources focus heavily on Peirce's model, the iconic, indexical, symbolic, it's worth a brief mention that Saussure focused more on language itself. He talked about the signified, which is the concept, like the idea of a tree, and the signifier, which is the sound image or written form, like the word tree. His work is absolutely crucial for understanding how language transmits meaning, often through these arbitrary connections we talked about. But for film analysis, Peirce's focus on how we interpret signs and social interactions, how we make meaning from visual and other cues, is particularly insightful.
That makes perfect sense. So this deeper language of signs applies to so much more than just what happens on screen. Our source, the one written from an architect's perspective, even brings architecture into this whole discussion. How does that connect?
It connects beautifully, actually. Architecture can be explored as a complex symbol system, much like literature or film. Buildings aren't just functional spaces. Their components, their design, their materials, they're systematically organized to create meaningful statements. Think about how the imposing grandeur of a parliament building instantly symbolizes power and authority. You don't need a sign saying, "This is powerful." Or think how a simple, open, well-lit home might symbolize welcome, comfort, or transparency. The design speaks. This perspective highlights that architects, when they're designing, are deliberately infusing cultural meanings into structures. And when they fail to do so, maybe the design doesn't connect with the local culture or context. Buildings can become what the source calls irrelevant signs, just structures without deeper resonance, failing to convey pertinent and contextual meaning within the cultural framework of a society. They become, well, just shells.
So when a building works, it's not just shelter, it's a statement. It resonates. Can you give us an example from the sources how this deep meaning gets embedded in architecture almost instinctively?
Absolutely. A really powerful illustrative example from our source traces this back to our ancestors. They used caves as shelters, right, providing not only physical protection from the elements, but also a profound sense of psychological security. Over time, these caves became symbolized in the human mind. They became mental images, signifiers of security. This demonstrates how profoundly a physical space can be imbued with meaning, transforming a purely practical object, a cave, into a mental symbol that represents a complex concept like safety and security. And this is exactly what set designers in film actively leverage. They create spaces that instantly convey meaning far beyond their physical form, tapping into our deep-seated associations with certain types of places, materials, or light. 2. Semiotics in filmmaking, crafting narrative through design.
That's a fascinating connection. So if even a static building can speak through signs, imagine what a film with its moving images, sound, dynamic narrative, imagine what it can do. It's like a whole universe of communication constantly sending us messages.
Precisely. Film is an incredibly powerful medium of mass communication. It doesn't just tell stories, it reflects and influences the historical, political, economic, social, and cultural aspects of the society it comes from. It uses signs, visual, auditory, symbolic, to give meaning to scenes, creating a rich cinematic language where images and sounds combine to form a meaningful whole. And what's truly fascinating is that each film spectator, each one of you listening, brings your own unique education, socioeconomic class, cultural upbringing, personal experiences, all of that to the viewing experience. This means the interpretation of a film is always unique to each person. It emphasizes how films engage us on both intellectual and emotional levels, often adding layers of secondary meaning through our own excitement and ingrained cultural values.
And this is where the concept of mise en scène comes into play, isn't it? That French term that covers, well, basically everything we see in the frame.
Yes, mise en scène is absolutely crucial here. It literally translates to placing on stage or putting into the scene. And it encompasses everything that appears in the frame, not just the actors, but props, costume, wardrobe, actor movements, the lighting. And crucially, set design and the overall setting of a scene. The production design team works incredibly closely with the director, the cinematographer, other departments to ensure these elements construct a tale that goes beyond what's directly visible or spoken in the dialogue. It's not just about aesthetics or making things look pretty. It's about conveying character, mood, personality, story nuances, and even subtext by paying meticulous attention to the smallest details.
And this is where that architect's perspective from our source really shines, connecting the worlds of buildings and cinema in a very practical, hands-on sense.
Indeed, it does. Structures and buildings in film are regarded not just as backdrops, but as important cultural characters in themselves. Think about how much a location tells you. They transport us to different eras. They convey social status instantly. They transmit messages about the characters inhabiting them. Our source even posits that the cinematic route is the modern version of the architectural route, suggesting this profound relationship where the consumer of architectural space, someone walking through a building, is almost the archetype of the cinematographer moving the camera through space. Both architecture and cinema involve movement through space, experiencing it sequentially. And film semiotically transforms that physical space into something symbolic, creating a narrative journey for the viewer through visual information.
So it makes perfect sense then that the role of a set designer would be a highly coveted career path for many architects. Their skills just seem to line up perfectly.
They really do. And architect skills in design, planning, drafting, modeling, 3D visualization, they are perfectly suited for creating high-quality, detailed film sets quickly and efficiently. But it's more than just the technical skill. Architects are already familiar with ethnography and spatial norms, understanding how different cultures interact with and imbue meaning into space. This gives them a unique advantage in adding semiotic value to a design. This thoughtful inclusion of meaning, this layering of symbols and associations, it not only adds mystery and complexity to the narrative, but also enables audiences like you to understand meaning more clearly and experience particular emotions. This means every detail, every item on a desk, every spatial arrangement in a room, every material choice for a wall can be a deliberate sign, carefully selected to achieve that emotional and narrative connection with the audience. Nothing is accidental. Well, ideally, nothing is accidental. 3, case studies. Semiotics in practice. Pierce's model in action.
Okay, so let's put this theory into practice. Let's see it in action. Our source gives us 3 fantastic case studies from very different genres and cultures. The Indian historical drama Ponniyan Selvan, the classic silent science fiction film Metropolis, and the modern social thriller Parasite. This is where it really gets interesting, seeing these concepts come alive in actual films.
Absolutely. These examples beautifully illustrate Pierce's model of iconic, indexical, and symbolic signs, showing us just how meticulously filmmakers embed layers of meaning into every frame. Let's start with Ponniyan Selvan, a sweeping Indian historical drama. This film is incredibly rich with semiotic meaning, particularly in its production design, the sets, the architecture, the costumes. For iconic examples where the sign directly resembles what it represents, it's pretty clear. You see a map of the Chola Empire, and it graphically resembles the actual territory it depicts. Simple. A scene depicting a kingdom setup, with the palace, the throne room, the courtiers, it's immediately recognizable as a kingdom setup. And a stage, clearly designed for a cultural event, looks exactly like what it's meant to be. These are all direct visual representations, leaving little to the imagination.
Straightforward visuals. And what about indexical signs in Ponniyan Selvan, where one thing directly points to another, that cause and effect relationship?
Good question. For indexical examples showing that direct causal relationship, imagine a zoomed-in image of the sun. It directly represents heat and a sunny day. We infer that meaning because sunny days are hot. The sun implies heat. Or a character's face, contorted in anger, may be combined with a sword clutched tightly in their hand. That doesn't just show emotion. It indicates a specific intention, perhaps vengeance or an imminent conflict. The anger plus the weapon points directly to likely violence. Similarly, a person sitting on a throne immediately conveys that they are the king or queen. The act of being seated on that specific grand object is directly linked to the status of royalty. The throne indicates kingship.
Makes sense. The throne points to the king.
Exactly. But the truly fascinating elements in Ponniyan Selvan, I think, are often its rich symbolic examples, where meaning is culturally assigned rather than directly depicted or caused. Take the extensive use of unpolished brown granite stone and the distinctive Gopuram architectural style, those towering gateways seen throughout the film. These elements immediately symbolize the Chola Empire, a powerful historical kingdom in South India. This relies on the viewer's cultural knowledge, their familiarity with ancient Indian architecture. Similarly, the presence of specific Dravidian architectural elements in palace design isn't just aesthetic flair. It's a direct symbolic link to Chola architecture and heritage. It tells you who these people are, where you are historically.
So the building materials themselves become symbols.
Absolutely. And consider other powerful symbols. A huge ship carrying troops to war, or the recurring tiger symbol. These aren't just details, they powerfully represent the Chola period and its military might. The tiger was a key emblem of the Cholas. When you see fire burning intensely behind a prince, it's not just a visual effect to look cool. It symbolizes his intense anger and rage, especially in a wartime context. Fire often symbolizes destruction or passion. The many Buddhist statues appearing in a particular scene, they signify that the setting is Lanka, modern Sri Lanka, which historically housed many Buddhist disciples. It's a geographical and cultural marker. Even something as subtle as capturing the night in a specific way, maybe very dark, very still, can symbolize silence or stealth, particularly when a character is sneaking into a palace. The goddess Kali idol and Dravidian elements like the mythical creature Yali, seen in a sunken courtyard meeting, are further symbolic depictions, specifically relating to the Cholas. A group of Shiva devotees following a particular leader can symbolize the potential outcome of him becoming the next king, hinting at the intersection of religious and political power. A simple white dress on a female character often symbolizes purity or innocence, a fairly common, though not universal, visual cue. Arches and tiger flags relating to the Chola Empire clearly symbolize that a Chola member owns a particular mahal or palace. And a solitary ray of light piercing through darkness, a classic symbol for a ray of hope in a bleak situation. Even the choice of bronze material on a shield isn't random. It symbolically references its immense availability during the Chola timeline, grounding the film in historical accuracy through materials. It adds authenticity. And finally, a lingering, closer shot of the Chola Empire throne is not just looking at a prop, it visually portrays the immense importance of acquiring it, symbolizing power, ambition, legacy, and destiny. You can see how every choice, from grand architecture down to the material of a shield, weaves this rich cultural and narrative tapestry.
That's incredible, just layers upon layers of meaning communicated visually and symbolically. Now let's turn to a true classic of cinema, a masterclass in visual storytelling from a very different era. Fritz Lang's 1927 silent film, Metropolis. This one uses its futuristic setting to convey some pretty profound social commentary.
Indeed, Metropolis is a pioneering work that masterfully employs semiotics to build its dystopian world, especially given it had no spoken dialogue to rely on for exposition. For iconic examples, it's quite direct. A scene depicting a futuristic city is instantly recognizable through its vertical layers and towering skyscrapers. You see it, you know it's a future cityscape, even if it looks different from our future.
Right, it looks like a city, just a very stylized one.
Exactly. For indexical examples, the film uses cause and effect visually. Think of the display of tools and gadgets, clocks ticking erratically, electric arcs spitting, boiling beakers bubbling surrounding the character Rotwang. These elements don't just exist as props. Their presence, their activity, directly suggests he is a mad scientist, a creator of complex and potentially dangerous things. The gadgets indicate his function. Similarly, an electric ring light appearing around the robot Maria doesn't just illuminate her. It indicates a specific transition stage, signaling her transformation or activation. The light points to the change happening.
Okay, the lab points to the scientist, the sparks point to the transformation.
Precisely. And the symbolic examples in Metropolis are truly profound and have resonated for nearly a century. The vertical layers and imposing heights of the buildings themselves aren't just architectural details. They powerfully symbolize the vertical segregation of social classes. The elite live in luxury high above in the clouds, while the workers toil miserably in the depths below. The city structure is the class structure. When the female robot is created, she doesn't just look human. She's designed to symbolize lust, to manipulate the male workers. She embodies a concept, a dangerous temptation, rather than merely being a physical form. Conversely, the human Maria functions as an icon of an idealized woman, a virgin, Madonna, angel, symbolizing purity and representing a feminine, nurturing underground environment where she teaches forgiveness and love. She's a symbol of hope.
It's like the architecture itself is a character, isn't it? Almost a participant in the social critique. The buildings feel alive with meaning.
Exactly. A key skyscraper is depicted not just as a tall building, but as a contemporary Tower of Babel, symbolizing humanity's hubris, the dangers of unchecked ambition, and specifically an industrial workers' production hellhole. The overall visual style, Gothic, dark, drawn out, lots of shadows. That chiaroscuro lighting doesn't just create an atmosphere. It symbolizes fright and confusion, contributing to the oppressive, nightmarish mood of the city. Even the magnificent skyscrapers with their sharp, angular skylines symbolically represent the Art Deco style of architecture, grounding the futuristic vision in contemporary design movements of the 1920s, reflecting the aesthetic sensibilities of the time it was made.
And the machinery below. That seems like a whole symbolic world in itself.
Oh, absolutely. The machinery underground with its enormous, relentless mechanical clock arms, oppressive pipes, and constant steam explosions. It doesn't just run the city, it symbolizes the workers' production house, a hellish, dehumanizing environment that literally consumes those within it. An exploding machine in one famous sequence is not just mechanical failure, it's visually metamorphosed into Moloch, a man-consuming pagan idol. This symbolizes a false idol created by the director's hallucinated vision of humanity being sacrificed to industrialization. It's incredibly potent symbolism. Even the magnificent clock design is symbolic. There's a smaller 24-hour clock, presumably for the industrialists, the thinkers, and then these huge 10-minute blocks for the ordinary laborers, emphasizing their grueling, fragmented shifts. This isn't just about telling time. It symbolizes the profound division of time and class, highlighting the exploitation of the workers. A large gong in the lower city that marks the changing of work shifts isn't just an alarm clock. It symbolizes the oppressive tension, the relentless rhythm of their working lives versus their living conditions. And finally, the film's eclectic mix of architectural and design styles. You see bits of industrialism, Art Deco, modernism, futurism, Gothic. Even Bauhaus itself creates a unique symbolic landscape, reflecting the complexities, the contradictions, and the anxieties of the modern era it was grappling with. A society facing rapid technological and social upheaval.
Wow, so much packed into a silent film. And now for Parasite, a much more recent film from South Korea, but one that uses semiotics in equally powerful, perhaps even more visceral, ways to convey its searing social commentary. It feels like almost every object in that film is loaded with meaning.
Absolutely. Parasite, the 2019 South Korean social thriller drama, masterfully uses almost every visual element to underscore its themes of class disparity, social mobility, and societal inequality. It's a masterclass in contemporary semiotic filmmaking. For iconic examples, the film relies on direct visual representation, just like any film. A shot of a WC, a toilet, plainly portrays a bathroom. No hidden meaning there. A clumsy, cramped, cluttered, and less organized room clearly illustrates the condition of a poorhouse, the Kim family's semi-basement. And a huge room full of expensive clothes instantly depicts a walk-in closet in the wealthy Park family's home. These are all immediately recognizable physical spaces that require no complex interpretation on that basic level.
Right, but even those simple spaces feel charged. And the indexical signs in Parasite feel like they're almost designed to make you feel uncomfortable, to point directly at the inequality.
They absolutely are. For indexical examples, that film really makes you feel the implications. The less maintained state of the Kim family's bathroom, and especially that toilet raised up on a platform because of drainage issues. These aren't just quirky details, they directly emphasize the degraded society and poor community they belong to. The physical condition directly indicates their low status and difficult, precarious living conditions. It points to their vulnerability. Or consider the repeated visual of the Kim family walking upwards, constantly trekking uphill towards the Park house. This simple physical action directly implies the Park family is wealthier and socially superior, existing on a higher social and literal plane. Going up means moving towards wealth. Capturing the lavish, overflowing walk-in closet of Mrs. Park clearly shows the status of the family. The sheer quality and quantity of clothes are direct, tangible indicators of wealth, almost obscene wealth compared to the Kims. Even an arrow symbol seen briefly in the film, pointing downwards, can directly imply the motion of someone arising from the hidden basement, referencing a character's desperate movement upwards from confinement.
So the visuals are constantly pointing to status, direction, and the gap between the families.
Exactly. But the symbolic examples in Parasite are particularly poignant and contribute massively to the film's chilling, unforgettable impact. The semi-basement house of the Kim family isn't just where they live, it physically symbolizes their precarious existence, balanced between hope and fear. They can see the street, get some sunlight, they're connected to the outside world in a limited way, but they are also vulnerable, always partially hidden, always looking up, and, crucially, easily flooded by the rains that barely affect the parks. It's a perfect metaphor for their social position. And then there's the pervasive, almost visceral presence of smell and dust associated with the Kims. These don't just make the film feel realistic. They symbolize raw emotions like anger, distrust, discomfort, and a dark sense of foreboding. Smell becomes a tangible marker of class, an invisible but potent barrier, symbolizing the deep, ingrained, and often unconscious biases that separate the families.
Yeah, the smell thing is incredibly powerful. And the contrast in the actual living spaces, the architecture itself, is almost a character in the film, too.
You're spot on. The cluttered, off-kilter, almost spider-like and rat-like streets and alleys around the Kim residence contrasted sharply with the harmonious, minimalist, ordered, see-through glass panels of the ultra-modern Park house. This visually screams the disparity. It's a stark visual representation of the wealth gap that doesn't need to be explicitly stated in dialogue. The minimalist architecture and contemporary design in the park house symbolize a sophisticated, controlled, modern lifestyle, a carefully curated, seemingly perfect world built by a famous, fictional architect. And interestingly, as the source notes, those minimalist interiors with their clean lines and lack of clutter can also make you feel that all you see is all there is. This itself can symbolize a kind of superficiality or lack of hidden depths in the wealthy family's lives. Everything is on display, perfectly arranged, but perhaps masking something unseen or simply empty underneath.
Like the hidden bunker itself.
Exactly. Further symbolic elements in Parasite include the young park son, Da-song, drawing a disturbing ghost figure instead of a self-portrait. This isn't just a child's random drawing. It symbolizes a hidden, buried mystery, directly foreshadowing the secrets lurking within the house, specifically in the basement. Black and white lines, used subtly in design elements throughout the film, like costumes or decor, visually represent the way the two families are portrayed as stark opposites, a clear visual metaphor for their polarized existence. The bunker or basement, the shocking mid-film reveal, isn't just a hidden space. It's tied to a buried mystery associated with the Park family's estate, symbolizing the hidden underbelly of their wealth and privilege, the secrets and exploitation upon which their perfect life is built. And stairs. Stairs are perhaps the most potent recurring visual symbol in the film. Both families constantly trek up and down them, the Kims climbing up out of their basement, up the streets, up into the park house, and then desperately fleeing down during the flood, the Parks descending into their basement unaware. This constant vertical movement powerfully symbolizes social stratification, the struggle for upward mobility, and the vast wealth gap reflected in the architectural highs and lows within the city. Finally, even that simple scholar's rock, introduced early in the film as a gift to the Kims, is heavy with symbolism. It's meant to symbolize good luck and great wealth, representing the Kim family's aspirations and misguided hopes for advancement. But ultimately, it becomes a tragic, ironic symbol, even a weapon, highlighting the crushing weight of their ambitions and the impossibility of their escape. These examples really demonstrate how the film's entire visual grammar, every carefully chosen element, meticulously reinforces its core message about class struggle. 4. Films as mirrors and movers of society, political and cultural subtext.
Wow. Okay, it's abundantly clear that films use semiotics, this language of signs and symbols, to tell their stories on multiple levels. But beyond just telling the story, many films are also powerful vehicles for social and political commentary. They hold up a mirror to society, reflecting its issues, its anxieties, or sometimes they actively try to push society in a certain direction, shaping opinions or sparking debate.
Exactly. Cinema is widely considered a microcosm of the social, political, economic, and cultural life of a nation. It's often a contested site where meanings are negotiated, traditions are made and remade, and identities, national, cultural, personal, are affirmed or rejected. This raises an important question. How explicitly or subtly do films engage with these themes? And what does that engagement, or lack thereof, reveal about the society that produces and consumes them? Many Asian horror films, for instance, as our Reddit source discussion highlights, use genre conventions, monsters, ghosts, extreme situations to delve into deep societal issues, often in quite overt ways. They turn real-world anxieties into terrifying metaphors. Shin Godzilla from Japan, the 2016 reboot, is a prime and very direct example. It overtly, almost satirically, mocks the Japanese government's bureaucratic, slow, and often ineffective disaster responses. Some real-world commentary referenced in the discussion even noted that after a major disaster like the Fukuoka earthquake, the Yakuza, the Japanese organized crime syndicate, actually provided better and faster relief efforts than the official government agencies. That's a sentiment that Shin Godzilla clearly taps into, reflecting a deep societal cynicism towards authority and its competence in a crisis.
So it's not just a monster movie rampaging through Tokyo. It's a sharp critique of institutional failure, wrapped in kaiju skin.
Precisely. And other kaiju films, while maybe not all originating directly from nuclear bombings like the very first one, often carry similar allegorical weight. The original Gojira, released in 1954, is undeniably a powerful allegory about the horrors and anxieties surrounding nuclear technology in post-WW2 Japan, just years after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And Godzilla vs. Ghidorah from 1971 specifically addresses pollution and toxic waste, a direct commentary on the environmental degradation caused by rapid industrialization. These films use the spectacle of a giant monster to explore very real, pressing social and political anxieties of their time.
It seems like horror is a potent genre for this kind of commentary in Asian cinema.
It definitely can be. Beyond the kaiju genre, Suicide Club from Japan, 2001, explores the deeply concerning epidemic of student suicides in Japan, tackling a very sensitive and tragic social issue through the visceral lens of horror. Another incredibly powerful example mentioned is Battle Royale from Japan, released in 2000. This film, a brutal and violent predecessor to things like the Hunger Games, depicts a near-future Japanese government forcing delinquent high school students to fight to the death on a remote island as a way to curb juvenile delinquency. It's shocking and intense. The source discussion notes that the filmmaker, Kinji Fukasaku, was apparently inspired by his own traumatic WW2 experience working in a munitions factory as a teenager. His high school class was ordered to work there and then had to fight for cover during a U.S. Navy attack, even burying their dead classmates. That kind of experience clearly informs the film's intensity. And the central political theme it poses is a universal and enduring one. Must children do what adults ask of them? And is the political system the adults guide them into worth following? This is a profoundly resonant question that challenges societal norms, authority, and the very concept of generational responsibility and sacrifice.
That's a chilling origin story for Battle Royale. It really emphasizes how personal experience, especially trauma, can fuel such potent political commentary in art. Are there other examples that deal with more contemporary anxieties?
Absolutely. Akira, Japan, 1988, the landmark anime film, powerfully explores the dangers of unhindered scientific progress, government corruption, and unchecked human evolution or power, grappling with humanity's capacity for self-destruction. Cairo, Pulse, 2001, and Ju-on, the Grudge series, starting 2000, both from Japan, address themes of technology, alienation, isolation, and mental health, common concerns in late 90s to early 2000s Japanese horror that reflect growing anxieties about modern life, loneliness, and the potentially dehumanizing impact of technology on human connection. Moving to South Korea, The Wailing, 2016, a critically acclaimed and complex horror film, deals subtly but powerfully with Korean-Japanese historical tensions, racism, and prejudice. It suggests that a character's preconceived guilt and xenophobia activated a deadly trap, impeding proper police work and leading to widespread tragedy. It's about the horror of prejudice itself. Train to Busan, 2016, and The Host, 2006, both huge South Korean hits, critically examine class issues and toxic work culture within Korean society. They use fantastical elements, zombies in one, a monstrous creature spawned from pollution in the other, to highlight real-world inequalities, corporate greed, and the failures of government authority. Sorum, South Korea, 2001, is described in the discussion as social realist horror, subtly highlighting economic inequality and the desperation of impoverished characters trapped by their dire circumstances in a decaying apartment building. The horror comes from their reality. Even a more niche miniseries like Tokyo Vampire Hotel, Japan, 2017, though quite stylized and perhaps less direct, apparently alludes to Japan's ongoing demographics crisis, anxieties about the government's response, and perhaps a sense of national isolationism, using vampires as a metaphor. And then there are more extreme, explicit examples mentioned, like Men Behind the Sun, a highly graphic Hong Kong film depicting the horrific atrocities of Unit 731, or Black Sun. These are noted for their extreme content, but also their undeniable, if controversial, historical and political references. Across the board, Asian horror often seems willing to confront difficult social truths.
That's a wide range. Now, turning to India. Hindi cinema, often known globally for its elaborate song and dance numbers, also deeply engages with India's social and political landscape, sometimes in surprising or complex ways.
Yes, absolutely. Hindi cinema, or Bollywood as it's often called, serves as a vital microcosm of the nation's life. It's a cultural space where meanings are constantly negotiated, traditions are debated and remade, and identities, national, regional, religious, are affirmed or sometimes rejected. Many scholarly works, like the journal article we looked at, emphasize the strong, undeniable connection between India's complex political and social history and its popular cinema. Some films consciously break conventional narratives, moving beyond pure entertainment to venture into explicitly political themes, often facing significant pushback or controversy. For instance, the director Prakash Shah, his film Gangajajal, released in 2003, courageously exposed the inner workings of the police and judicial system, political corruption, and the machinations of ruling politicians. It provided a stark and unflinching view of the state of Bihar, an area often perceived as plagued by lawlessness and caste conflict. It was quite impactful.
And Jha also made Arakshan, which tackled another really sensitive issue, right?
Yes. His later film, Arakshan, 2011, is particularly insightful in illustrating the pressures filmmakers face. While it was initially intended to address the incredibly charged national debate on reservation policies, affirmative action for historically disadvantaged castes, which is an extremely sensitive and emotionally volatile issue in India, it ended up pivoting its focus somewhat, critiquing the commercialization of private coaching classes that prepare students for entrance exams. Now, this shift, according to our source, demonstrates how external pressures like potential censorship from the government, distributor anxieties about controversy, or perceived market demands for a less politically divisive topic can significantly influence a film's final message. It can lead to this balancing act that might dilute or alter its initial political intent. It really highlights the tightrope filmmakers often walk when trying to engage with sensitive social or political issues within a commercial industry.
That's a fascinating example of how real-world pressures can actively shape the narrative we see on screen. What about the portrayal of overseas Indians, the diaspora, in Hindi cinema? Our source mentioned that's a very evolving political and cultural discourse reflected in film.
It's a truly dynamic area showing how cinema reflects changing national attitudes. Historically, early Indian documentaries and Bengali films like Bilefarat way back in 1921 often portrayed expatriates, people who had gone abroad, especially to England, Vilayat, as losing their Indian roots, becoming morally corrupted, or adopting negative Western ways. The Persian word vilayat, meaning province, was used during the colonial era to designate England and Europe, essentially meaning what was outside India, and it was often associated with immorality or a loss of cultural purity. Until the late 1980s, emigration could still carry a stigma, with economists even evaluating the cost of the brain drain and suggesting ways to potentially tax expatriates living abroad.
But that changed quite dramatically, didn't it?
Yes, there was a significant shift, particularly accelerating after the economic liberalization of the 1990s. This coincided with a mass influx of educated Indians, especially tech workers, into the U.S., and also the coming of age of second and third generation migrants in places like the U.K. The term vilayat gradually gave way to Pardes. Now, Pardes comes from des, meaning country, and the prefix par evokes movement, travel, proactivity. It's a much more positive term and no longer necessarily implies a spatial or moral distance from the homeland. This reflected a profound change in attitude within India itself. The non-resident Indian NRI figure emerged as an epitome of modern, globalized India. They were celebrated for potential benefits like sending remittances back home, bringing in foreign direct investment, FDI, and enhancing India's image abroad. Newer Hindi films, especially from the 90s onwards, often vehemently champion Indian values even when the characters are living abroad. They depict NRIs as successful yet deeply connected to their Indianness. This reflects a societal shift in emphasis, moving from jus soli, citizenship determined by place of birth, towards jus sanguini, citizenship determined by blood ties, heritage, and perceived morality. Belonging became less about where you lived and more about maintaining cultural identity and values, even from afar. It's a powerful cultural negotiation played out repeatedly on screen.
Very interesting. Okay, let's delve into a specific case study from the source that really generated a lot of discussion and critique. Prakash Shah's Chagravyu from 2012 and its treatment of the Maoist or Naxalite insurgency in India, a long-running and very complex conflict.
Yes, this film, Chagravyu 2012, offers a complex and, according to our source, somewhat problematic lens on the Maoist Naxalite insurgency, which primarily affects impoverished rural areas and indigenous Adivasi communities in central and eastern India. On the surface, the film appears sympathetic to some of the rebels' stated causes. It highlights issues like corporate land grabs displacing poor villagers, the pervasive influence of corporate money on politics, and the brutality of state counterinsurgency operations. It even portrays the police, at times, as hostile to state-sponsored vigilante groups like Salwa Judum, and it attempts to unmask the negative impacts of certain state developmentalist strategies, suggesting they often harm the local population more than help.
So it seems like it's trying to present a critical view of the situation.
It tries, yes. However, our source provides a very detailed critique of the film's limitations and inherent biases, demonstrating how even well-intentioned political films can fall short or inadvertently reinforce certain dominant narratives. Despite its surface-level sympathy, the film tends to romanticize the Maoist intellectuals involved in the movement. They are often depicted as highly educated, ethically driven figures, sometimes from elite backgrounds. The source mentions fictional characters having attended places like Doon School, LSE, and Oxford. This focus on elite intellectuals can be seen as inadvertently trivializing the broader, deeply rooted socioeconomic complexities of the movement, which is primarily driven by the struggles and grievances of extremely marginalized peasant and Adivasi communities, not Oxbridge graduates. Furthermore, the conflict is often reduced, visually and narratively, to a battle between a few key leaders on both sides, the charismatic rebel commander versus the determined police officer. This reflects, perhaps, a common middle-class perception of politics as being driven by personality cults and individual heroes or villains, rather than understanding it as the collective action, sacrifices, and motivations of the rank-and-file members of the movement.
So it potentially simplifies a very complex, mass-based social movement down to individual heroes and villains, maybe making it easier for a mainstream audience to digest.
Precisely. And a very significant critique centers on the problematic depiction of the Adamasi people themselves, the indigenous tribal communities who form the actual backbone of the movement on the ground. They are often generically labeled and depicted through stereotypes as innocent tribals, who are poor, hapless, gullible victims easily manipulated by outsiders, or sometimes as untrustworthy informers. They are frequently reduced to mere numbers in the rebel army, often shown dying without context, lacking individual voice, agency, or a clear sense of remorse for their immense sacrifices. Their own complex histories, cultures, and political motivations are largely erased. The film also employs, according to the critique, Orientalist tropes using exoticizing visuals of Adivasi men shown with spears, long hair, beards, and women wearing exotic headgear, and staging generic tribal culture dances. This reinforces stereotypes rather than providing nuanced, respectful representation of their diverse lived realities and cultures.
That sounds quite problematic, especially if the film is claiming sympathy.
It is. Furthermore, the source notes that the film clearly had to contend with pressures from the censor board, likely demanding balance. This seems to have led to a constant, sometimes jarring flip-flopping between scenes critical of the state or corporations and scenes humanizing the police or demonizing the rebels. This external influence arguably diluted its potential message and created narrative inconsistency. It also apparently presents exaggerated statistics regarding inequality and the geographical spread of the movement. While perhaps intended to heighten drama, this might inadvertently serve to fuel public fear or justify state crackdowns rather than offering an accurate analysis of the situation's real scale and nature. This detailed critique from the source really shows how even films attempting serious political commentary can be deeply shaped by dominant societal views, like middle-class perspectives on protest, market pressures, the need for balance and avoiding offense, and prevailing ideologies. Sometimes they can end up inadvertently reinforcing problematic narratives or stereotypes, even while trying to appear critical. It truly underscores, as the source argues, that reading films diagnostically, looking at how they represent issues, presents profound insights into the current political situation, the hopes and fears of the population, and the prevailing ideologies that shape a nation's self-perception. The orality and representation in African cinema.
That's a powerful reminder of the incredibly intricate relationship between film, society, politics, and representation. Now let's move across continents and explore another fascinating aspect of how culture shapes cinema: the role of orality, of spoken tradition, in African film. This is where we see a direct connection, sometimes a tension, between how stories were traditionally told for centuries and how they are represented on screen.
This raises an incredibly important question, doesn't it? How is meaning conveyed and how is it received when there's a strong, deeply ingrained oral tradition at play, rather than a primarily literature-based culture? Literate cultures, like many Western ones, tend to emphasize the visual and store knowledge primarily in written documents, books, archives, databases. This can sometimes, arguably, fragment consciousness, separating the observer from the observed, creating a kind of objective distance. In stark contrast, many oral cultures encode knowledge and communal memory in performance, in proverbs, in storytelling passed down through generations. They often use sound, the spoken word, music, rhythm, to draw the observer into the very center of an auditory world, fostering a more integrated experience where material and spiritual realms are often not seen as distinct. The encounter between these two forms of culture, particularly through colonialism and subsequent industrialization, has often favored the technological, the written word, sometimes at the expense of indigenous forms of knowledge and expression. African filmmakers, however, as our source perspectives on orality in African cinema argues, often act as crucial cultural intermediaries. They creatively weave indigenous aesthetics, storytelling techniques, and mythologies into the modern technological form of cinema, creating something new and hybrid.
And this relates to the idea of third cinema.
Yes, the concept of third cinema is vital in this context, though it originated more broadly in Latin America and North Africa as well. It's not a genre like horror or comedy, but rather a set of political and aesthetic strategies used by critical filmmakers, particularly from the Global South, to resist cultural imperialism and political oppression. Its core purpose is often described as creating a liberated space within cinema, liberated from Hollywood conventions and neocolonial influences, and often, explicitly, to educate and empower the oppressed. Unlike much of mainstream Western genre cinema, which often focuses heavily on the individual hero's journey, third cinema frequently emphasizes that the communities and the individual personal struggles are always understood as being deeply intertwined with collective experiences, history, and political realities.
So it's explicitly political filmmaking, designed to challenge dominant narratives, especially those imposed from outside.
Exactly. Many African films operating within or influenced by this third cinema framework are often explicitly political. They aim, as the source puts it, to reconquer and revise images of Western representations about Africa. They assert the right of Africans to represent themselves, their histories, their cultures, actively contesting the often stereotypical or simplistic mediated images circulated by Western media and neocolonial centers of power. A compelling example mentioned is Jean-Marie Thénault's Cameroonian film Afrique, je te plumerai, Africa, I will fleece you, from 1991. It explicitly states that colonialism perpetrated cultural genocide. The film explores how traditional oral culture in Cameroon has been profoundly influenced, often negatively, by the imposition of writing, French colonial administration, and the modern state bureaucracy. This, Thénault argues, has led to a cultural vulnerability and even internal repression by the post-colonial elite within African nations. There's a subtle paradox here, as the source points out. Critical African films like Thénault's often face censorship or lack of distribution within their own countries, sometimes due to their challenging political themes. Yet, ironically, they often gain recognition and awards in first-world film festivals. This means filmmakers often act as these cultural intermediaries, germinating new hybrid oral and visual styles that are sometimes stored in exile, awaiting appropriate political and social conditions to return home and truly flourish within their own communities.
That's a powerful image. These cinematic ideas, these voices, being held in exile, waiting for their moment to be fully heard at home. This brings us to a specific case study discussed in the source that really highlights this tension between oral tradition and cinematic interpretation, and how it can lead to significant misunderstanding. The South African film, The Two Rivers.
Yes, The Two Rivers, 1985, a South African film made during the height of apartheid, is a compelling and somewhat tragic example, according to the analysis. It's a film that was largely misunderstood by many of its contemporary critics precisely because of its complex and perhaps ultimately problematic attempt to mesh traditional Venda oral codes with modern documentary visual imagery. The film is uniquely narrated by Rashaka Ratchatonga, who is identified as an Mbongi, a traditional oral storyteller or praise poet of the Venda people in northern South Africa. His specific narrative style, rooted in Venda oral tradition, is absolutely key to understanding the film's intended message and also why it was misread.
So what is the film actually about? What are these two rivers?
Well, the film refers to two rivers, symbolically. There's a white river representing white culture, and a black river representing black African culture. According to Ratchatonga's narration, these two rivers eventually merge, particularly in the melting pot of Johannesburg. This symbolizes the complex, ongoing cultural encounters, clashes, and transformations occurring in South Africa under apartheid. The film chronicles the historical dispossession of the Venda people by the encroaching white South African state, represented visually by the loss of their ancestral land, and also culturally by the decline of cherished customs like age group initiation rites. Ratchatonga himself identifies as one of the last participants of these traditional rites, lending a deeply personal, elegiac weight to the narrative. He's bearing witness to a cultural loss.
So it is a commentary on the injustices of apartheid, but perhaps not delivered in the direct, explicitly oppositional style that many anti-apartheid activists or international audiences might have expected at the time.
Exactly. The film critiques the South African government's Bantustan policy, the creation of supposedly independent ethnic homelands like Venda, which were in reality impoverished and controlled puppet states. It shows Venda as an independent homeland that is actually experiencing ongoing Western economic colonization. It points to very tangible signs of this, like the incongruous appearance of Kentucky Fried Chicken outlets, the establishment of a brewery industry leading to social problems like alcoholism, and the prevalence of poor housing. It also subtly points to the complicity of some African leaders installed by the apartheid regime in this disempowerment. The film depicts the devastating impact of the migratory labor system, where Venda men were forced to leave their homes to work in the mines and industries of Johannesburg. This led to the emergence of a new, vibrant but struggling black urban center Soweto, but also resulted in the devastating loss of human resources and the breakdown of traditional society back in Vendaland. So it presents two major cultural conflicts playing out. The initial historical European-African cultural conflict resulting from colonization, and the newer, more contemporary African represented by Soweto urban culture versus white South African represented by Johannesburg cultural conflict.
But it was misunderstood. Why?
The misunderstanding of the film by critics, including many sympathetic anti-apartheid viewers, both inside and outside South Africa, is crucial here. Its political position seemed amorphous, unclear, or ambiguous to many. Some even concluded it might be pro-government propaganda, precisely because it deliberately avoided using the explicit word apartheid. In the highly polarized context of the 1980s, this omission was seen as deeply suspect. The filmmaker's decision, likely influenced by Ratchatonga's narrative style, not to use explicitly oppositional discourses, not to directly condemn the government in clear, unambiguous terms, or make overt value judgments, was perceived as a political weakness by those expecting a direct, activist political polemic.
But that avoidance of direct judgment, that more observational or chronicling style, that was fundamental to the Mbongi tradition itself, wasn't it? To record, to praise, to lament, but not necessarily to deliver explicit political denunciations in a Western sense.
You've hit on the core of the misunderstanding, according to the source's analysis. The traditional role of the Mbongi is key here. As a chronicler of his people's lives, history, and values, an Mbongi documents what he sees and experiences. He praises leaders, laments losses, celebrates traditions, but doesn't necessarily take overt, explicit political positions or make direct critical comments in the way a Western political commentator might. His ideological leanings and critique often emerge much more subtly, perhaps through allegory, historical parallels, or rhetorical questions. For instance, the film questions what independence truly means for the Vendas when their land is still controlled, their resources exploited, and their people are forced into migratory labor. The critique is embedded, not stated outright. For Ratchatonga, the Mbongi, the film seems to be primarily about rewriting Venda history from their own perspective, incorporating their voice, their narrative into the broader contested history of South Africa, rather than simply accepting the dominant white narrative. He romantically, perhaps nostalgically, portrays the Vendas as a politically viable, culturally rich society before European colonization, arguing that Europeans fundamentally destroyed their civilization. He does this by weaving in depictions of traditional cultural aspects like initiation rites and employing oral narrative devices, even using traditional proverbs within his narration. He subtly undermines the Afrikaner Boer narrative of the Great Trek and the Boer War, for instance, by describing the conflict dismissively as simply a fight between two dogs over stolen meat, implying it was just a squabble between two groups of colonizers over land stolen from Africans rather than a heroic founding struggle. So despite those initial misinterpretations by critics perhaps unfamiliar with or unsympathetic to this specific Venda oral tradition embedded within the film, the source argues that the film's underlying subtext ultimately suggests something quite complex. That the coming together, the merging of separate black and white cultures in the crucible of the big cities could potentially result in a new cultural stream, perhaps showing the way towards a more integrated, albeit challenging future for South Africa. An unexpected and perhaps ambiguous message for its time, delivered through a misunderstood cultural lens. Outro.
So what does all this mean for us as viewers? We've journeyed through the intricacies of semiotics, peeling back the layers of political commentary in various film traditions from around the globe, Japan, India, South Korea, South Africa, Germany. And we've even explored how ancient oral traditions find new life and sometimes new challenges and misunderstandings in modern cinema. It's truly incredible how much a film can communicate beyond its surface story, beyond just the dialogue and the plot you follow consciously.
It absolutely underscores that a film is never just a film. It's a complex tapestry woven from signs, symbols, cultural reflections, historical echoes, and often very deliberate political statements, whether overt or deeply buried in subtext. Understanding these layers, learning to spot these signs, it enriches our viewing experience tremendously. It allows us to engage with cinema on a much deeper, more critical level, moving beyond just consuming entertainment to actively decoding meaning, understanding context.
And you, as the viewer, are an active participant in this whole process. It's not just passive reception. Your own background, your experiences, your cultural lens on the world all play a significant role in how you interpret these cinematic messages. What you notice, what resonates, what you might miss. It really is a two-way street of communication, a constant dance between the filmmaker's intent, the film's text, and your unique perception.
Definitely. Which brings us to an important question for you to consider, maybe the next time you watch a film. How might recognizing this hidden language of semiotics and being aware of the potential presence of political and cultural subtext in films actually change the way you watch movies from now on? And perhaps more importantly, what new insights might you gain, not just about the film itself, but about the societies, the cultures, the historical moments that produce these cinematic texts?
Yeah. This deep dive into semiotics in film reminds us that every frame, every prop, every architectural detail, even the choice of a specific color or sound, can be a deliberate choice, loaded with potential meaning. It's a powerful reminder that the stories we watch are always telling us more, often much more, than we initially hear or see on the surface. That's all for this deep dive. Keep watching and keep decoding.